Richmond Refrains devotional number 4, day something of quarantine. Does time really matter anymore? A missionary God in the midst of a pandemic. Our yard is looking nicer than it ever has thanks to this pandemic and stay-at-home order the governor has put in place. I'm exercising more, I'm reading more, I'm talking to Kendra more, I'm spending more time outside, alone, of course. Don't worry. However, I'm also eating a lot more. I'm watching YouTube a lot more and spending a lot more time on the computer. Maybe you can relate to all this. While many people are simply focused on weathering this pandemic and getting back to normal later, the people of God are invited to be tapping into the missionary nature of God and thinking about how to partner with what God is doing in this time. Simon Sinek, a business consultant and motivational speaker, says that an important mindset for people to have during this pandemic is not, how do we simply continue to do what we are doing, but instead, how will we continue to do what we are doing in a different world when the pandemic is over? He says to not be in survival mode, but instead be in reinvention mode. So while I don't agree with all of Sinek's reflections in the video where he says that, they tend to be a little too capitalistic for me, I do think this is important for Christians to not just think about how to get back to normal after this crisis is over, but instead spend time in prayer, asking God about and thinking about the ways He is inviting us to join Him in His mission during this crisis, rethinking the way our churches will look after the crisis is over. While many Christians cannot or are choosing not to gather together in public spaces right now, that does not mean the mission of God is put on hold. No, it simply changes the way it looks for us to join with that mission. In fact, it was in precisely a time similar to this that Christianity made some of its biggest impact in the world. When people were fleeing cities en masse to escape a plague in ancient Roman Empire, it was the Christians who stayed behind in the midst of the sick and dying to care for them, often at the cost of their own lives. Now, with our current understanding of viral diseases and how sickness is spread, it is ill-advised for Christians to just run willy-nilly into the COVID units at hospitals, but we can learn something from these early Christians. What they did then is they took a step back to see what God was doing in the world to accomplish His mission, rather than see what their individual churches could accomplish in the world through their missions. Note that difference. If they had just focused on the latter, they would have fled the cities with everyone else and set up shop in the next town over in order to continue carrying out their mission. But instead they saw an invitation from God to completely reinvent their Christian presence and join God in His mission in the midst of their new reality, even to their own peril. It will take a lot of time and effort for us to reinvent our Christian presence, but I believe that is what God is inviting us to do. Brian Sanders writes in an article with Outreach magazine that while the COVID-19 pandemic is cause for grief and mourning around the world, it gives us the gift of uncertainty, which allows us the space and time to reinvent what our Christian presence looks like. He asks these 4 questions to help us look at this crisis with a missionary perspective, and I will end with these with slight adaptations for our reflection. First question is, what really matters in this time? The second is, what is actually good news to the people around me right now? The third is, what can we or I do well with the current restrictions that are in place? And fourth, what are we or I actually hearing from God to do next? That's all we have for today. So until next time, grace and peace.